Inheritance is a funny thing. One minute you're scraping by, working a dead-end job you tolerate purely because the health insurance is decent, the next you're the sole proprietor of Curiosities and Keepsakes, a sprawling, dust-choked antique shop in a town barely large enough to warrant a zip code. My great uncle Elias, a man I'd met maybe 3 times in my 30 years, had shuffled off this mortal coil and, for reasons known only to him and whatever lawyer drafted the will, left me everything. The shop wasn't just a shop. It was a 3-story Victorian monstrosity attached to the retail space, crammed floor to ceiling with the accumulated detritus of centuries. Elias hadn't just collected antiques. He'd hoarded history, letting it pile up in shadowed corners and behind locked doors. The air inside hung thick with the scent of old wood, decaying paper, lavender polish, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old pennies or dried blood. My task, according to the lawyer's accompanying letter, was simple: catalogue the entire inventory before deciding whether to sell the place lock, stock, and barrel, or attempt the Herculean task of running it. Given my bank account balance, selling seemed inevitable, but the sheer volume of stuff was overwhelming. Weeks, maybe months, of work lay ahead. I started on the main floor, armed with a digital camera, a laptop, and a growing sense of unease. The silence in the shop was profound, broken only by the creak of floorboards under my weight and the distant sigh of wind outside. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grimy windows, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. Porcelain dolls with vacant eyes watched me from high shelves. Tarnished silver gleamed dully in display cases, and furniture draped in white sheets stood like patient ghosts. It was on the third day, tucked away in a cramped alcove behind a monstrously large armoire, that I found it. A grandfather clock. It wasn't just any clock. It was magnificent, easily 9 feet tall, carved from a dark, almost black wood that seemed to drink the light. Intricate carvings snaked up its sides, unsettling, asymmetrical patterns that weren't quite floral, weren't quite anything recognizable. The brass pendulum hung perfectly still behind the glass door, and the clock face, framed by leering, gargoyle-like carving at the top, was marked with Roman numerals that seemed subtly wrong, skewed at odd angles. The hands were frozen at 307. There was no price tag, no inventory number like on some of the other larger pieces. Just the clock, silent and imposing. Taped discreetly to the side, almost hidden against the dark wood, was a small, yellowed envelope sealed with wax. My name, Arthur Penhaligon, was written on it in Elias' spidery, archaic script. My fingers trembled slightly as I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of brittle paper, filled with the same handwriting. Arthur, if you're reading this, then the inevitable has occurred, and the shop, along with its burdens, is now yours. I apologize. Most of what you find here is just clutter, valuable perhaps to some, but ultimately inert. Dispose of it as you see fit. The clock, however, the one you found this note upon, is different. It requires specific attention. Do not treat it as mere inventory. It is a responsibility. Follow these instructions precisely. Do not deviate. Do not question. 1. Do not wind the clock. Under no circumstances attention to the weights or attempt to start the pendulum before midnight on the 7th day after you first enter the shop alone. 2. Clean the exterior glass and wood daily, precisely at dusk. Use only lemon oil for the wood and vinegar water for the glass. No other substances. 3. Never open the back panel. The mechanism is not your concern. 4. If the clock ever chimes before you wind it on the 7th day, leave the shop immediately. Do not return until the following sunrise. Lock all doors behind you. 5. At midnight on the 7th day, you may wind the clock. Turn the key exactly 3 times. No more, no less. Let the pendulum swing. 6. After winding, never look directly at the clock face between the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Avert your gaze. I cannot fully explain the necessity of these measures. Just know that they are vital. For your safety, and perhaps for more than that. Elias. I read the note twice, then a third time. A cold knot formed in my stomach. This was insane. Elias had always been eccentric, bordering on reclusive, but this felt different. This felt like genuine, structured paranoia. Or was a warning. Daily cleaning rituals? Specific winding instructions? Never look at the face at a certain hour? And what was this about the seventh day? Today was Thursday, my third day here. That meant the seventh day would be next Monday. I looked at the clock again. Its dark was seeming even more menacing now. The frozen hands at 3:07 suddenly felt significant. Was that AM or PM? And why that specific time? My rational mind screamed at me to ignore it. It was an old clock, probably broken. Elias was a lonely old man spinning tales around his possessions. But the atmosphere of the shop, the sheer oppressive silence, the weight of forgotten years, it made the irrational feel plausible. And rule number 4, if it chimes before you wind it, leave immediately. That implied it could chime on its own. Dismissing it as nerves, I decided to focus on work. I spent the rest of the afternoon cataloguing a box of horrifying Victorian medical instruments, trying to push the clock and the strange note from my mind. As dusk began to settle, painting the dusty air in hues of orange and purple, I remembered Rule 2, clean the exterior glass and wood daily, precisely at dusk. With a sigh, feeling utterly ridiculous, I found some old rags, lemon oil, and made a vinegar water mix in the small back room that served as a kitchenette. Returning to the alcove, the clock seemed taller, darker. The gargoyle face at the top felt like it was watching me, its carved sneer deepening. Following the instruction, I carefully wiped down the glass, covering the face and the pendulum, then meticulously polished the dark wood with the lemon oil. The wood felt strangely cold beneath the rag, colder than the ambient air. As I polished the base, my hand brushed against something rough. A new carving, low down, almost hidden. Unlike the flowing, unsettling patterns above, this was jagged, crude, like desperate scratches. It looked like a date, or part of one. 188. The last digit was obscured by a deep gouge in the wood. I finished the cleaning just as the last light faded outside. The shop was now truly dark, relying on the few bare bulbs I'd switched on. The clock stood in its alcove like a sentinel in the gloom. I packed up the cleaning supplies, telling myself I'd fulfilled the obligation, however absurd. Time to call it a night, grab some takeout from the town's single diner, and retreat to the small, slightly less creepy apartment above the shop. As I walked towards the front of the store, past aisles of silent furniture and watchful porcelain eyes, I heard it. Tick. I froze. Talk. It was quiet, barely audible, but unmistakable. Coming from the alcove. Coming from the grandfather clock. Tick. The pendulum wasn't moving. I hadn't wound it. The hands were still frozen at 3:07. Talk. But the clock was ticking. Midnight was still hours away. The seventh day was days away. Tick. Rule number 4 slammed back into my mind. If the clock ever chimes before you wind it on the seventh day, leave the shop immediately. It wasn't chiming, not yet. But it was ticking, unwound, unbidden, alive. Talk. My breath hitched. Every nerve ending screamed at me to run, to obey the spirit, if not the letter, of Elias' bizarre rule. But another part, the stubborn, rational part that had gotten me through life thus far, balked. The rule said chime. Ticking wasn't chiming, was it? Tick. Maybe it was just settling. Old springs, residual tension. Houses made noises. Old clocks probably did too. I forced myself to take a step back towards the alcove, straining my ears in the oppressive silence. Talk. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost gentle, deceptively normal. If you didn't know the clock was inert, the pendulum still, the weights slack. I crept closer, phone flashlight held out like a trembling ward. The beam landed on the glass door. Dust motes danced in the light. Behind the glass, the brass pendulum hung utterly motionless. The hands remained fixed at 307. Tick. Where was the sound coming from? It seemed to emanate not from the mechanism behind the face, but from the wood itself, like a heartbeat trapped within the dark grain. Talk. I leaned closer, pressing my ear near the side panel, ignoring the carved grotesquerie leering inches away. The wood was vibrating, ever so slightly. A faint, deep resonance accompanied each tick. Tick. It felt wrong. Utterly, fundamentally wrong. This wasn't mechanical. It felt organic. Alive. The metallic tang I sometimes smelled in the shop seemed stronger here, sharper. Talk. Enough. Rationality be damned. Ticking or chiming, something was happening that shouldn't be. Elias' warning, the sheer creepiness of the place, the vibrating wood, it coalesced into a certainty. Get out. Now. I scrambled backwards, bumping into a display stand and sending a cascade of ceramic figurines crashing to the floor. The shattering sound echoed unnaturally loud in the vast space. And then, the ticking stopped. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I froze, halfway to the front door, heart hammering against my ribs. Had I imagined it? Had the crash somehow stopped it? I waited. 1 second. 2. 5. Nothing. Just the faint hum of the old wiring, the whisper of wind outside. Maybe it was just settling. Maybe I was letting Elias' strange letter and the shop's atmosphere get to me. Feeling foolish, but still deeply unsettled, I continued towards the front door. My hand was on the deadbolt when I heard a new sound. A low groan. Long, drawn out, like stressed timber or metal under strain. It came from the alcove. I didn't turn around. I fumbled with the locks, fingers suddenly clumsy. Deadbolt slid back. Chain rattled. Key turned in the main lock. Another groan, louder this time, ending in a sharp crack. Like bone snapping, my breath caught. I yanked the door open and stumbled out into the cold night air, not daring to look back. I slammed the heavy door shut, the sound echoing down the deserted street. Chain back on. Deadbolt thrown. Key turned, locking it tight. Only then did I lean back against the cold wood, gasping for air, the adrenaline making me shake. What the hell was that? What was in there? The streetlights cast weak yellow pools on the empty sidewalk. The town was asleep. Across the street, the diner was dark. Above, the stars seemed impossibly distant. I was utterly alone. I stared at the shop's dark windows, the faint outlines of shapes within barely visible. Did I imagine the groan? The crack? No. They were as real as the frantic pounding of my own heart. Rule 4 hadn't technically been broken. The clock hadn't chimed. But something else had happened. Something that felt far more menacing than a premature chime. My car was parked a block away. The thought of walking back to the apartment above the shop, knowing what was potentially happening below, was unbearable. The rule had said leave the shop. Did the apartment count? Technically, it was a separate entrance around the side, up an external flight of stairs. But it was the same building, sharing the same foundation, sharing the same presence. No, I couldn't stay there tonight. Not after that. I fumbled for my keys, my hands still shaking, and practically ran to my car. Sliding into the driver's seat, I locked the doors immediately, peering back towards the dark facade of Curiosities and Keepsakes. It looked like a slumbering beast, its windows dark eyes watching me. Where could I go? Drive back home, 6 hours away? Check into the town's only motel, a place that looked like it hadn't seen fresh paint since the Eisenhower administration? I opted for the latter, needing proximity more than comfort. If I had to go back at sunrise, as the implied inverse of Rule 4 suggested, do not return until the following sunrise, I didn't want a long drive ahead of me. The Shady Pines Motel lived up to its name, minus the pines. A flickering neon sign cast a sickly green glow over peeling paint, and cracked asphalt. The night clerk, a man who looked carved from stale cigarette smoke, barely glanced up as I paid cash for a room. The room smelled faintly of mildew and despair. The patterned bedspread was questionable, the bathroom grim. But it had a lock, and it wasn't that building. I wedged the flimsy chair under the doorknob anyway, drew the threadbare curtains, and sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, Elias' note clutched in my hand. Do not deviate. Do not question. Up until tonight, I had questioned. I had deviated, mentally at least, dismissing the rules as the ramblings of an old man. Not anymore. The ticking, the groan, the sickening crack. They had stripped away my skepticism. Elias knew something. Something dangerous resided in that shop, tied to that clock. And I, Arthur Penhaligon, inheritor of junk and burdens, was now tied to it too. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the motel, every distant car passing on the highway, made me jump. I kept seeing the clock in my mind, the gargoyle face, the wrong numerals, the still pendulum. I kept hearing the tick, the talk, the groan, the snap. What had I inherited? What responsibility had Elias thrust upon me? And the seventh day, Monday, midnight, winding the clock. What would happen then? Part of me wanted to just drive away now, leave the key with the lawyer, tell him to sell the cursed place to the first fool willing to take it. But Ellie's journal entry in the waitress story echoed. If anything happens to me, Maggie will find this. She's always been the careful one, the one who pays attention to details, the one who follows the rules. Elias had left the shop to me. Maybe for a reason. Maybe, like Maggie, I was meant to be the careful one, the one who followed the rules. Or maybe Elias just didn't have anyone else. As the first hints of grey lightened the sky outside, exhaustion finally claimed me for a brief, troubled hour. I woke with a start, the room filled with pale morning light. Sunri se, time to go back. Driving back towards the shop, my stomach churned with apprehension. What would I find? Would the clock be ticking again? Would there be signs of whatever had made those sounds last night? I parked across the street this time, observing. The shop looked exactly as I'd left it. Dark, silent, imposing. No broken windows, no signs of disturbance. Taking a deep breath, I got out and crossed the street. Unlocking the front door felt like stepping into a lion's den. The air inside was still, heavy with the same old scents. Dust motes hung suspended in the weak morning light filtering through the front windows. I listened. Silence. Absolute silence. No ticking. Cautiously, I made my way towards the back, towards the alcove. My footsteps echoed too loudly on the wooden floor. I rounded the corner, half expecting. I don't know what. The alcove was empty, save for the clock. It stood exactly as before. Hands at 307. Pendulum still. The pile of shattered ceramic figurines lay where they had fallen near the display stand. Everything looked normal, except on the floor, directly in front of the clock, gleaming faintly in the dust, lay a single, old-fashioned brass key. It wasn't the winding key. Elias' note implied I wouldn't get that until the seventh day. This was different, smaller, more ornate, and lying right where nothing should have been. Hesitantly, I bent down and picked it up. It was cold, heavy. Attached to its loop by a thin, frayed black ribbon was a small, tarnished silver tag. Engraved on the tag, in faint, looping script, was a single word. Basement. The word on the silver tag seemed to thrum against my fingertips. I stood there in the dusty alcove, the cold brass key heavy in my palm, the silent grandfather clock looming beside me. Elias' meticulous list of rules hadn't mentioned a basement. He detailed the cleaning, the winding, the specific times to avoid looking at the clock's face, but nothing about exploring the foundations of this ancient building. Was this key a clue? A test? Or something left behind by whatever had made those horrifying sounds last night? The memory of the groan and the sharp crack sent a fresh wave of ice through my veins. Maybe that thing was downstairs now. I looked around the main floor. Sunlight streamed weakly through the grimy front windows, illuminating floating dust but offering little comfort. The shop felt watchful, expectant. My gaze drifted towards the back, near the kitchenette, where a heavy, bolted door sat flush against the wall, the basement entrance. In all the time I'd lived here as a kid, and in the days I'd spent cataloguing, I'd barely given it a second thought. It was just the basement, filled with more of Elias' junk, probably damp and spider infested. Papa had kept it locked tight, just like he kept the grandfather clock alcove mostly ignored. But now it felt different. The key felt like an invitation. Or a dare. My instincts screamed caution. Elias' note was emphatic. Do not deviate. Do not question. Going into the basement felt like a major deviation. But the alternative, ignoring this potential clue, pretending the night's events hadn't happened, simply waiting for Monday midnight while knowing something was fundamentally wrong, felt impossible. The key hadn't just appeared, it felt placed. Purposefully. Decision made, however reluctantly, I pocketed the key and forced myself to continue cataloging. I needed to keep busy, to try and maintain some semblance of normalcy until dusk when the next ritual was due. I avoided the alcove, giving the grandfather clock a wide berth each time I passed. I didn't listen for ticking, didn't allow myself to dwell on the memory of the vibrating wood. Work was slow, my concentration short. Every creak of the old building sounded like footsteps, every shadow seemed to depend and shift. I kept glancing towards the basement door, the brass key feeling like a lead weight in my pocket. Finally, as the afternoon light began to fade, casting long, distorted shadows across the shop floor, dusk arrived. Time for rule 2. Gathering the lemon oil, vinegar water, and rags felt less ridiculous this time, more like a necessary rite. As I approached the alcove, the grandfather clock seemed to wait, impassive. The air around it felt still, heavy. I cleaned the glass, my reflection staring back, pale, wide-eyed. I polished the wood, the cold, dark grain seeming to absorb the light. My hand hesitated as it passed over the crude carving near the base. 188. What happened in the 1880s connected to this clock? As I worked, I listened intently. Silence. No ticking. No vibrations. Just the oppressive stillness of the shop. Finishing the task, I stepped back, relief washing over me briefly before being replaced by the gnawing question of the basement. Now. It had to be now. While there was still some daylight, however weak. I retrieved the basement key. It felt unnaturally cold. Walking to the back, I stood before the heavy door. Unlike the shop's main doors, this one had only a single, sturdy-looking lock and two thick slide bolts, top and bottom. Unlocking it felt momentous, the click echoing loudly. Sliding the bolts back took effort. They were stiff from disuse. Taking another deep breath, I pulled the door open. A wave of damp, earthy air, thick with the smell of mold and something else, that faint, underlying metallic tang, washed over me. It wasn't the overpowering stench I'd feared, not like something was actively decaying down there, but it was unpleasant. My phone flashlight cut a weak beam into the absolute darkness below. A steep, narrow staircase, rough wooden treads coated in grime, descended into blackness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and uncertain. Only the echo answered. Gripping the phone tightly, I started down, testing each step before putting my full weight on it. The air grew colder, damper. The silence was absolute, broken only by my own breathing and the creak of the ancient wood. Reaching the bottom, I swept the light around. The basement was surprisingly large, stretching further than the footprint of the shop above suggested. Rough stone walls glistened with moisture. The floor was packed earth, uneven and damp in places. Unlike the rest of the house, it wasn't crammed with boxes. There were a few dilapidated shelves against one wall holding indeterminate shapes covered in cobwebs, a rusty old furnace in a corner, and, in the center of the room, Directly beneath the alcove where the grandfather clock stood upstairs was a circle of dark, disturbed earth. It looked like something large and heavy had recently rested there, compacting the soil. The depression was roughly the size and shape of the clock's base. Had the clock been down here? I cautiously approached the circle. The metallic smell was stronger here. Kneeling down, I ran my fingers over the damp earth. It felt cold, almost unnaturally so. My fingers brushed against something hard just beneath the surface. Digging slightly with my fingertips, I unearthed a small, rectangular object. It was a tarnished silver locket, heart-shaped, intricately engraved, but the engravings were worn smooth with time or handling. It felt old, very old. With trembling fingers, I fumbled with the clasp. It clicked open. Inside were two miniature portraits, faded but still discernible. On one side, a young man with familiar eyes, Elias, decades younger, perhaps in his early 20s. On the other side, my breath caught. A woman with startlingly intense, dark eyes and long, dark hair, incredibly beautiful, but with an unnerving severity to her expression. I didn't recognize her, but beneath her portrait, almost too small to read, was a tiny inscription. Jade, 1887. Jade, the name from Elias' journal, the green-eyed woman in the impossible photograph. But the journal photo looked like it was from the mid-20th century. This locket, this portrait, felt much, much older. And the date, 1887. It matched the partial carving on the clock. My mind reeled. How could Elias, born in the 1920s, be pictured with a woman from 1887? Unless the journals weren't alternate realities like Tom suggested, but actual history? Elias' personal history? Suddenly, a faint sound drifted from the far corner of the basement. A soft scraping, like cloth dragging against stone. I froze, snapping my flashlight beam towards the sound. The far corner was plunged in deeper shadow, beyond the reach of the single bare bulb dangling overhead near the stairs. The scraping stopped. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracking. Silence. Then a soft, wet cough. My blood ran cold. I wasn't alone down here. Slowly, deliberately, I stood up, the silver locket clutched tight in my fist. I backed away towards the stairs, sweeping the flashlight beam back and forth across the shadowed corner. I saw nothing but damp stone and cobwebs. The cough came again, closer this time, accompanied by a shuffling sound. Whatever it was moving. I turned and scrambled up the stairs, not stopping until I burst back into the relative safety of the shop floor. I slammed the basement door shut, fumbling with the bolts, sliding them home, locking the key lock. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Leaning against the door, gasping for breath, I listened. Silence from below. Had I imagined it? The cough, the scraping? Or was someone trapped down there? And had finding the locket disturbed it? Jade, 1887. Elias. The clock. The metallic smell. The creature last night. It was all connected. The clock wasn't just a clock. It was a focal point. Maybe even a doorway. I looked at my watch. Hours yet until midnight. Days until the seventh day. The weight of Elias' responsibility felt immense, suffocating. I had cleaned the clock. I had found the key. I had entered the basement. I had found the locket. And I had possibly woken something up. The shop around me felt colder now, the shadows deeper. And from the distant alcove, almost too quiet to be sure, I thought I heard it again. Tick. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was louder than before, more distinct. A clear, sharp tick cutting through the heavy silence of the shop, emanating from the grandfather clock in the alcove. Talk. I backed away from the basement door, the cold brass key still clutched in one hand, the silver locket in the other. My gaze snapped towards the alcove, though I couldn't see it directly from here. Tick. It wasn't settling. It wasn't my imagination. The clock was ticking again, just as it had last night before the groan and the crack. Unwound, unpowered, alive. Talk. Panic flared, cold and sharp. Rule 4 screamed in my head, leave immediately. But I hesitated. Last night, the ticking had stopped, replaced by something worse. Would leaving again simply postpone whatever was happening? Would it be waiting for me, worse than before, when I returned at Sunrise? Tick. And what about the thing in the basement? The cough, the scraping. Was it connected to the clock? Had opening the basement door, finding the locket, somehow triggered this? The locket itself felt heavy, almost pulsing faintly in my palm. Talk. I couldn't just leave. Not this time. Ignoring the rule felt like stepping off a cliff, but following it felt like abandoning the field to whatever unseen forces were at play. Elias' note said the instructions were vital for my safety, but it also called the clock a responsibility. Responsibilities sometimes required facing danger, not running from it. Tick. Taking a ragged breath, I forced myself to move, not towards the front door, but stealthily towards the main part of the shop where I could see the alcove. I needed to observe, understand, talk. Peeking around a tall glass display case filled with dusty surgical tools, I looked towards the clock. It stood silent in the gloom, seemingly unchanged. The pendulum was still. The hands hadn't moved from 307. Yet the ticking persisted, loud now in the relative quiet of the main floor. Tick. The sound wasn't just auditory. I could almost feel it, a low vibration in the floorboards, in the air itself. The shop felt charged, tense. The porcelain dolls on the shelves seemed to watch with a new intensity, their painted eyes gleaming. The shadows in the corners felt deeper, colder. Talk. Then something shifted. Not the clock itself, but the air around it. A faint shimmer, like heat hadge, distorted the space directly in front of the clock face. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. Tick. The temperature dropped sharply. I could see my breath fogging in the air. Goosebumps erupted on my arms. The metallic smell intensified, acrid and sharp, stinging my nostrils. Talk. The shimmering intensified, coalescing. It wasn't heat hedge. It looked like a tear, a faint, vertical distortion in the air, like looking through old, warped glass. It pulsed faintly in time with the ticking. Tick. From within the tear, if that's what it was, came a whisper. Faint, sibilant, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Indecipherable words, ancient and cold. Talk. I stumbled back, knocking against the display case. The whisper stopped. The shimmering tear vanished. The ticking ceased. Silence, absolute and profound, crashed back in. Even hum of the wiring seemed to have died. The shop felt suddenly inert again, just an old building full of old things. But the bone-deep chill remained, and the acrid smell lingered faintly. What had I just seen? A hallucination brought on by fear and exhaustion? Or a glimpse into something else? Something connected to the clock, to Elias, to Jade? I retreated to the kitchenette, my legs shaky. I needed coffee, strong and hot. As the ancient machine gurgled to life, I leaned against the counter, trying to process. The ticking, the cold, the shimmering, the whisper, it was too much, too strange. And the basement, the cough, the scraping. I hadn't imagined that. Something, or someone, was down there. Hurt? Trapped? Waiting? I glanced at the basement door, still bolted and locked. Did the creature down there know about the clock? Was it trying to get to the clock? Or out? The locket felt heavy in my pocket. Jade, 1887. How did she fit into this? Was she the source of the whispers? Was she connected to the creature in the basement? Days passed in a hedge of caffeine-fueled anxiety and meticulous cataloguing. Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Each dusk, I performed the cleaning ritual on the clock, my hands shaking slightly, half expecting the ticking or the shimmering to return. But it remained silent, inert, just a clock. Yet, The feeling of being watched never left. The shop felt different since I'd opened the basement door, since I'd witnessed the shimmering, charged, waiting. I never went back down to the basement. The locked door felt like the only barrier between me and something truly terrible. But sometimes, late at night, when the building settled, I thought I could hear faint sounds from below. A soft scrape, a muffled cough. Or maybe it was just the old furnace, or rats in the walls. I told myself it was rats. Sunday night arrived, heavy with dread. Tomorrow was the seventh day. Tomorrow, at midnight, I was supposed to wind the clock. Turn the key exactly 3 times. Let the pendulum swing. What would happen? Would the shimmering return? Would the whispers start again? Would the thing in the basement try to get out? Elias' final rule echoed. After winding, never look directly at the clock face between the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Avert your gaze. Why? What happened between those hours? Was that when it appeared? The owner of the whispers? Jade? Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were filled with ticking clocks, shifting shadows, dark woods, and intense emerald green eyes that weren't Jade's, mixed with the piercing black eyes of the creature in the cavern. Monday dawned grey and oppressive. Rain lashed against the windows, mirroring the storm brewing inside me. I barely touched my breakfast, spent the day pretending to catalogue, constantly glancing at the clock in the alcove. It just stood there, silent, waiting. As dusk approached, the final cleaning felt agonizingly slow. Every wipe of the rag, every drop of lemon oil, felt amplified. The gargoyle face seemed to sneer, the distorted numerals mocking me. Night fell. 9 p.m., 10 p.m., 11 p.m. The rain stopped, leaving an unnerving quiet. I sat in the main office, the small desk lamp casting a weak circle of light, Elias' note spread out before me. Midnight crept closer, minute by agonizing minute. 11:58. Time to face it. My heart pounded like a drum against my ribs. Picking up my flashlight, I walked out into the dark, silent shop. The air felt thick, heavy. I reached the alcove. The clock waited. Where was the key? Elias hadn't said. Would it just appear? 11:59. I scanned the clock. Nothing, just dark wood and cold glass. Then, precisely as the digital clock on my phone clicked over to 12 a.m., I heard a soft clink on the floor behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Lying on the dusty floorboards, gleaming faintly, was the winding key. Long, brass, intricately shaped. It hadn't been there a second ago. My hand trembled as I picked it up. It was ice cold. This was it. Rule 5. At midnight on the 7th day, you may wind the clock. Turn the key exactly 3 times. No more, no less. Let the pendulum swing. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I turned back to the clock. The brass key felt unnaturally heavy, almost vibrating with a contained energy. Its intricate teeth looked less like functional metal and more like carved bone. I approached the clock, the silence of the shop pressing in, amplifying the frantic beat of my own heart. There were 2 keyholes on the clock face, flanking the base of the hands. Which one? Elias hadn't specified. I hesitated, then reasoned the right keyhole was typically for the chime mechanism, the left for the timekeeping. Winding the timekeeping seemed the primary action. I inserted the key into the left hole. It slid in smoothly, fitting perfectly with a soft click. My knuckles brushed against the cold glass as I gripped the key. Exactly 3 times. No more, no less. I took a breath and turned the key clockwise. The resistance was immediate, far heavier than any normal clock mechanism. It felt like turning a key against tightly packed earth, a grinding, gritty resistance. A low groan echoed from deep within the clock structure, resonating through the wood and into my hand. 1 turn complete. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill in the air. I turned the key again. The grinding intensified, accompanied by a faint, high-pitched whine, like stressed metal. The entire clock frame seemed to shudder almost imperceptibly. The metallic smell, dormant since the shimmering incident, returned faintly. 2 turns. My nerves screamed at me to stop, to pull the key out and run. But Elia's warning, "Do not deviate," held me fast. One more turn. Gritting my teeth, I forced the key through the final rotation. The resistance peaked, the groan deepening into a resonant hum. And then, with a final, sharp clunk that echoed through the shop, the mechanism fully engaged. 3 turns. I snatched my hand back as if burned. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. The clock remained silent, the hands still frozen at 3:07. Then, with agonizing slowness, the brass pendulum behind the glass door began to move. It swung left, then right, utterly silent, catching the faint light from my flashlight beam. Its movement wasn't smooth or regular. It seemed almost hesitant at first, then gained a slow, ponderous momentum, swinging wider with each arc. And then came the ticking. Not the phantom ticking I'd heard before, but a deep, resonant thump. Thump, thump, like a slow, massive heartbeat originating from the clock's core. It wasn't the sound of gears, but something deeper, more organic. The floorboards beneath my feet vibrated faintly with each beat. Let the pendulum swing. I had done it. Rule 5 was complete. Quickly, I backed away from the clock, flashlight beam trembling. The air in the alcove felt thick, charged with static electricity. The shadows cast by the clock seemed darker, sharper. The gargoyle face appeared to be watching the swinging pendulum, its carved sneer somehow more menacing. I retreated further into the main shop area, the rhythmic thump. Thump, thump following me, an unnerving metronome counting down to. What? I glanced at my phone. 12:03 a.m. Rule 6 now loomed large. After winding, never look directly at the clock face between the hours of 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. Avert your gaze. 3 hours. 3 hours to wait in this charged, watchful silence, knowing that looking at the clock during that specific window was forbidden, dangerous. I found a relatively clear space near the front, positioning an old armchair so its back was mostly towards the alcove, but angled slightly so I could see the alcove's entrance from my peripheral vision. I needed to know if anything emerged, but I wouldn't look directly at the clock face itself, especially not between 3 and 4. Settling into the chair, the locket and the basement key cold in my pocket, I waited. The only sound was the clock's deep, slow heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. It set my teeth on edge, a constant reminder of the strangeness I had unleashed. Time crawled. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. The shop remained silent, save for the clock. The dust settled. The shadows remained stubbornly deep. I strained my ears, listening for any sound from the basement, but heard nothing beyond the clock's pervasive beat. Had the ticking somehow placated the thing down there? Or was it listening to? Waiting? 2:30 a.m. The rhythmic thumping seemed to be getting subtly louder, the vibrations more pronounced. Or maybe it was just my heightened senses, the lack of sleep, the mounting dread. 2:45 a.m. I forced myself to stay awake, sipping lukewarm coffee I'd brought back from the motel. The urge to turn, to just glance at the clock face, was almost overwhelming. What was so special about 3 a.m.? 2:55 a.m. 5 minutes. The air grew perceptibly colder. The metallic tang sharpened again. My breath fogged. The rhythmic thump felt like it was inside my own chest now, vibrating through my bones. 2:58. A new sound joined the ticking. A faint whisper, like the one I'd heard during the shimmering incident. Sibilant, indistinct, seeming to come from the alcove, weaving around the heavy beat of the clock. 2:59. The whispering grew slightly louder, coalescing into something that almost sounded like words, just on the edge of comprehension. A name? Jade? Was it calling her name? Or was it her whispering? 3 a.m. The whispering intensified, swirling around the shop. The temperature plummeted further. Ice crystals formed on the inside of the front windows. The rhythmic thump of the clock deepened, becoming a heavy, visceral thud. Thud, thud. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing myself not to look, heart pounding erratically. The whispers seemed to be coming from everywhere now, slithering into my ears. Cold air brushed against my cheek. Look, the whisper was clear now, right beside my ear. Feminine, cold, and utterly compelling. Look at the time. My muscles tensed. Every instinct screamed to turn my head, to obey the voice, to see what was happening on the clock face. The urge was physical, a magnetic pull. Just a glance, Arthur. See who waits. Sweat dripped down my back, despite the freezing cold. I clenched my fists, digging my nails into my palms, focusing on the pain. Avert your gaze. Elias' words. My responsibility. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the dusty floorboards in front of me, breathing shallowly, fighting the overwhelming compulsion. The rhythmic thud of the clock seemed to count the seconds, each one an eternity. The whispers continued, seductive, demanding, promising, something, secrets, answers. Then, exactly as my phone screen illuminated with 4 a.m., everything stopped. The thudding ceased. The whispers vanished. The intense cold dissipated instantly, the air returning to its normal, musty chill. The shop was silent once more. Slowly, shakily, I unclenched my fists. My palms were bleeding slightly where my nails had broken the skin. I waited, listening. Nothing. Just the faint sound of my own ragged breathing. Had I done it? Had I passed the test? Resisted the call? After several long minutes, I dared to stand up, turning cautiously towards the alcove. The clock stood silent. The pendulum hung motionless once more. And the hands were no longer at 307. They now pointed to exactly 4 a.m. And taped to the glass, directly over the center where the hands joined, was a small, folded piece of dark paper, sealed with the same red wax as Elias' first note. The silence in the shop was absolute, a stark contrast to the oppressive thudding and insidious whispers that had filled it moments before. My ears rang faintly. I stood frozen for a full minute, listening, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the alcove. The grandfather clock stood inert, the pendulum still. The winding key was gone from the keyhole. Had it retracted? Fallen? Disappeared? I didn't see it anywhere nearby. My eyes fixed on the small, dark paper taped to the glass, positioned precisely where the hands met at 4 a.m. It looked ancient, the paper almost brittle, yet the red wax seal holding it folded was sharp and distinct. The symbol pressed into the wax wasn't Elias' familiar, simple crow's hatch. It was a complex sigil, reminiscent of the unsettling carvings on the clock itself. An asymmetrical knot or spiral that seemed to write the longer I looked at it. Hesitantly, I reached out and carefully peeled the note from the glass. It came away easily, leaving no residue. The paper felt cold, almost papery thin, yet surprisingly strong. With trembling fingers, I broke the wax seal. Inside, the script was unlike Elias' spidery scrawl. It was elegant, looping, almost calligraphic, written in a dark, slightly iridescent ink. Feminine, yet possessing a chilling formality. The message was brief, cryptic. Time stirs. Balance falters. Below, hunger grows. Appease the echo or join its silence. The key you hold unlocks the offering. My blood ran cold. Below, hunger grows. It had to mean the basement. The coughing, scraping thing I'd heard down there. An echo? An echo of what? Appease it. Feed it. The note mentioned an offering and the key. I instinctively touched the cold brass basement key in my pocket. Elias' note hadn't mentioned appeasement, only rules for the clock. This felt like a new, terrifying layer to the responsibility. Join its silence. The implication was clear. Failure meant becoming whatever that thing in the basement was, or perhaps becoming its next meal. My mind raced, connecting the pieces. Elias' warning, the clock's strange power, the impossible locket with Jade's portrait from 1887, the key appearing from nowhere, the entity in the basement. And now this chilling command. The clock wasn't just measuring time. It seemed to be regulating something, maintaining a balance. And winding it, surviving the forbidden hour, had apparently disturbed that balance, awakening the hunger below. The key I hold unlocks the offering. But what was the offering? What could possibly appease a creature seemingly born of shadow and decay? As if in answer, a sound echoed up from the floorboards beneath my feet. Not the faint scraping or coughing I'd heard before. This was louder, more distinct. A heavy, dragging sound, punctuated by a low, guttural moan that vibrated through the soles of my shoes. It was coming directly from the basement. I backed away from the alcove, my eyes glued to the floor, half expecting it to splinter upwards. The dragging sound continued, moving slowly, deliberately, as if something heavy was being pulled across the packed earth floor below. Then came a sharp thump, followed by silence. My breath hitched. Had it reached the stairs? Was it trying the door? I crept towards the back of the shop, towards the basement entrance, flashlight held forward, the silver locket clutched in my other hand like a useless talisman. I reached the door. It remained closed, bolted, locked. I pressed my ear against the cold wood. Silence for a moment. Then, unmistakably from the other side, scratch. Long, slow nails dragging down the wood. Scratch. Scratch. It wasn't frantic, not trying to break through. It sounded exploratory, testing, aware. It knew I was here. I stumbled backwards, heart hammering. Appease it. Feed it. How? With what? My eyes darted around the dimly lit back room. Nothing seemed appropriate. Dust, cobwebs, old cleaning supplies. Then my gaze fell upon the small kitchenette counter. Next to the ancient coffee machine sat the half-empty container of lemon oil and the bottle of vinegar water I used for the clock. Mundane items. Except lemon oil, vinegar, acidic, cleansing, perhaps? Could it be that simple? A symbolic offering? It felt absurdly flimsy, but it was the only idea I had. The scratching at the door had stopped, but I felt a palpable pressure building from below, a sense of growing impatience, of hunger. Quickly, I grabbed the oil and vinegar. Returning to the basement door, I hesitated. Unlocking it felt insane, but the note's warning, join its silence, felt chillingly real. With trembling hands, I slid back the bolts. I turned the key in the lock, the click echoing loudly. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the door open just a crack, maybe 6 inches, peering into the blackness below. The damp, metallic smell washed over me, stronger now, mingled with something else. A faint, sickly sweet scent, like overripe fruit or decay. I saw nothing in the oppressive darkness of the stairwell. Heard nothing. I have something, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. An offering. Holding the door slightly ajar with my foot, I quickly poured a small amount of the lemon oil onto the top step, followed by a splash of the vinegar water. The liquid spooled, gleaming faintly in the spillover light from the shop. For a moment, silence. Then, a low hiss emanated from the darkness below. It wasn't necessarily angry, more like acknowledgement. The pressure I'd felt seemed to lessen slightly. Was that it? Had that worked? Suddenly, from the bottom of the stairs, a pale, long-fingered hand snaked into view, reaching slowly towards the spilled liquids on the top step. It wasn't human. The joints bent wrong, the skin looked waxy and translucent, the nails were long, yellowed claws. It paused just inches from the small puddle. Then, deliberately, one claw-like finger dipped into the mixture. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. A piercing shriek tore through the basement, echoing up the stairwell. The hand spasmed, retracting violently back into the darkness. A furious scrabbling sound followed, as if the creature was recoiling in pain, crashing against the stone walls below. I slammed the door shut, throwing the bolts, locking the key, my body shaking uncontrollably. Appease it? That hadn't appeased it. That had hurt it. Enraged it. The shrieking from below stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the door, through the floor, seeming to shake the very foundations of the shop. It wasn't the sound of pain anymore. It was the sound of pure, unadulterated rage. I had failed. I had misinterpreted the offering, and now, whatever ancient, hungry thing lived beneath the shop knew I was here. And it was furious. The furious growling from the basement wasn't just a sound. It was a physical force vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the few remaining ceramic figures on the shelves, sinking deep into my bones. I stumbled back from the door, heart pounding, the acrid smell of vinegar and the sickly sweet scent of decay clinging to the air around me. Appease the echo or join its silence. I had tried. I had offered something, and it had been catastrophically wrong. The note hadn't specified what the offering should be, just that the key unlocked it. Unlocked what? Access to the basement? Or was the key itself part of the offering? It felt too simple. The growling intensified, shifting into a series of guttural roars and sharp, furious scraping sounds against the stone below. It sounded like the creature was thrashing, destroying things in its rage. Or perhaps, trying to find another way out? Panic seized me. The shop had stood for decades, maybe centuries. Were there other entrances to the basement? Forgotten coal chutes? Hidden passages known only to Elias or whatever came before? My eyes darted around the shadowed corners of the back room, searching for anything out of place. The building was old. Secret spaces weren't entirely out of the question. But I saw nothing, just grimy walls, dusty shelves, and the single, heavily bolted door I was currently pressed against, as if my meager weight could somehow reinforce it against the primal fury below. The key you hold unlocks the offering. I pulled the cold brass key from my pocket, staring at it. What did it unlock besides the basement door? It looked like a simple, albeit old, skeleton key. Could it fit other locks in the shop? There were countless locked cabinets, drawers, trunks scattered throughout the 3 floors. Elias had left me a massive ring of labeled keys for most things, but maybe this one was special, unlabeled for a reason. Holding the basement key, I also felt the locket against my palm. Jade, 1887. Was she the echo mentioned in the note? An echo of a past tragedy, trapped somehow? And the hunger. Was it her hunger? Or the hunger for her? The furious sounds from the basement subsided slightly, replaced by more deliberate, rhythmic thumping against the underside of the floorboards near the stairwell. It wasn't trying to break through the door anymore. It sounded like it was trying to smash its way directly up. I had to move. Find the offering. Fast. Clutching the basement key, I forced myself away from the door and hurried back towards the main shop floor, casting anxious glances behind me. The rhythmic thumping continued, a terrifying counterpoint to the dead silence that had otherwise fallen over the shop. Where to start? The key felt old. Maybe it unlocked something equally old? My eyes scanned the cluttered displays. A massive, iron-banded sea chest near the front window, an ornate writing desk with locked drawers in the corner office. My gaze fell again on the grandfather clock in its alcove. It stood silent, hands still pointing resolutely at 4 a.m. Could the key fit a lock on the clock itself? Elias' note explicitly forbade opening the back panel. But this new note, the one that appeared after winding, seemed to supersede, or at least add to the original instructions. Its command felt more urgent, more dire. Hesitantly, I approached the alcove again. The air here still felt colder than the rest of the shop. I ran my hand along the sides of the clock, searching for any hidden keyhole. Nothing obvious. I checked the front, near the face, around the glass door covering the pendulum. Still nothing. Then my fingers brushed against the grotesque gargoyle carving at the very top. Its leering mouth was open in a silent snarl. On impulse, I reached inside the carved mouth. My fingers met cold metal. A keyhole, hidden deep within the gargoyle's throat. My breath caught. Could this be it? The thumping from the basement seemed to pause, as if listening. With trembling hands, I inserted the brass basement key into the hidden lock. It was a perfect fit. I turned it. A soft click echoed from within the clock, deeper than the winding mechanism's sound. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a section of the clock's side panel, cleverly disguised within the intricate carvings, popped open slightly, revealing a dark cavity within. This wasn't the back panel Elias had warned against. This was something else. A hidden compartment. Heart pounding, I gently pulled the small door open. Inside, nestled on dark velvet lining, lay two objects. One was a small, leather-bound diary, its cover brittle with age, matching the apparent era of the locket. The other made my stomach clench. It was a long, thin silver knife, almost like a stiletto, its handle wrapped in decaying black leather. The blade itself gleamed faintly, seeming unnaturally bright in the dim light, and etched along its length were the same strange, unsettling symbols found on the clock and the wax seal of the second note. Was this the offering? A knife? Was I supposed to use it? On what? Or whom? Appeasing the echo suddenly took on a much darker connotation. Just as I reached for the diary, hoping for answers, the thumping from the basement resumed, louder, more frantic. It wasn't just thumping anymore. I could hear splintering wood. It was trying to break through the floor. Panic surged. I grabbed both the diary and the silver knife, slamming the hidden compartment shut. I didn't have time to read. I had to deal with the creature below. But how? The oil and vinegar had enraged it. What else could possibly work? My eyes fell on the knife in my hand. Silver, like the locket, like the bullets my grandfather used against vampires in the other story. Silver slows but cannot kill them, the creature in the cavern had said. Was this thing similar? An echo tied to silver? The splintering sound intensified, coming from directly under the floor near the basement stairs. Dust sifted down from the ceiling. Holding the silver knife felt right, grounding, as if it possessed its own subtle energy. Maybe the offering wasn't about giving something to the creature, but using something against it, appeasing it by subduing it, silencing it. It was a terrible gamble. But the floor near the basement door was visibly starting to buckle upwards. Time had run out. Gripping the silver knife tightly, its cold radiating up my arm, I ran back towards the basement door, ready to face whatever came through. I reached the back room just as the floorboards near the basement door exploded upwards in a shower of splintered wood and dust. The guttural roaring intensified, echoing sickeningly in the confined space. I skidded to a halt, raising the silver knife defensively, flashlight beam cutting through the swirling debris. From the ragged hole in the floor, something began to emerge. First, long, pale fingers tipped with yellowed claws scrabbled at the broken edges, pulling. Then, a head covered in lank, black hair, matted with grime and something darker, slicker. Finally, the creature hauled itself up, unfolding into the dim light. It wasn't large, perhaps the size of a starved teenager, hunched and unnaturally thin. Its skin had the same waxy, translucent quality as the hand I'd seen earlier, stretched taut over sharp, protruding bones. It wore tattered remnants of what might have once been a dark, old-fashioned dress, now little more than decaying rags clinging to its emaciated frame. But the face was horrifyingly familiar. Beneath the grime and shadow, the high cheekbones, the angular jawline, the shape of the eyes, it was undeniably the face from the locket. Jade, or a grotesque, decayed echo of her. Her eyes, however, were not the intense dark eyes from the portrait. They were milky white, filmed over, and utterly blind, yet they fixed unerringly on me, tracking my slightest movement. And her mouth, stretched into a rictus of hunger and rage, revealed rows of needle-sharp, blackened teeth. The sickly sweet smell of decay intensified, thick and cloying. It emanated from her, from the tattered dress, from the ragged, wound-like mouth. The growling subsided into a low, wet rasping sound, like air being forced through damaged lungs. It took a hesitant step towards me, its movements jerky, unnatural. One leg dragged uselessly, bent at an impossible angle. Had breaking through the floor damaged it? Or was it an old injury? Appeased the echo. The silver knife felt heavy, cold, almost humming faintly in my grip. Was I supposed to stab her? Offer her blood? The thought was revolting. Jade? I whispered, my voice barely audible. The creature stopped, its head cocked slightly, the blind eye seeming to narrow. The rasping breath hitched. A low moan escaped its throat, a sound of profound, ancient sorrow mixed with the ever-present hunger. It knew the name. It took another stumbling step, raising one clawed hand, not in attack, but almost as if reaching, pleading. The rasping intensified, forming into something that sounded vaguely like words, distorted by the ruined mouth and lungs. Cold, so cold. My grip tightened on the knife. This wasn't just a monster. This was a remnant. A trapped, suffering echo of the woman in the locket, twisted by time and whatever dark forces resided in this place. Appeasing her couldn't mean killing her, could it? The floorboards creaked behind me. I spun around, knife raised, heart leaping into my throat. Nothing, just shadows. But the sound reminded me I wasn't safe. The shop itself felt hostile, watchful. And the clock. Had winding it somehow unleashed this? I turned back to the creature. It hadn't moved closer, still half-crouched, its one reaching hand trembling slightly. The milky eye seemed fixed on the silver knife I held. Its rasping breath grew agitated again, the low growl returning. Silver, burns, Elias, promised. The words were fragmented, choked, but the meaning sent a jolt through me. Elias promised? Promise what? To protect her from silver? Or to use silver? The creature lunged, faster than I thought possible for its damaged leg. It scrambled across the floor on three limbs, its mouth opening impossibly wide, revealing the blackened, needle-like teeth. The hungry growl became a shriek. Acting purely on instinct, I slashed downwards with the silver knife. I didn't aim to kill, just to ward it off. The blade connected with its outstretched arm. The shriek became a piercing scream of pure agony. Where the silver touched, the waxy skin blackened and smoked, sizzling like water on hot iron. The creature recoiled violently, clutching its arm, stumbling backwards towards the hole in the floor. It writhed, its blind eyes rolling, the rasping breath turning into choked sobs of pain. The smell of burning, unholy flesh filled the air. It hadn't killed her, but the silver had wounded her terribly. Appeased? No, this was torment. It, collapsed near the edge of the hole, whimpering, the sound utterly wretched. The hunger in its posture was gone, replaced by raw, agonizing pain. It curled in on itself, trying to shield the burned arm. I stood there, breathing heavily, the silver knife smoking faintly. Horror and pity warred within me. This felt deeply wrong. Elias' rules, the clock, the locket, the knife. It felt like I was participating in some ancient, cruel ritual, not solving a mystery or fulfilling a responsibility. What did he promise you? I asked, my voice hoarse. The creature flinched at my voice, but didn't look up. It just continued to whimper, rocking slightly, the burnt flesh on its arm visibly cracked, and weeping a dark echo. Release, it rasped, the sound barely audible. Promised, release. Release from what? This tormented existence? From the basement? From the clock's influence? Before I could ask more, a loud clang echoed from the front of the shop. Someone was trying to open the front door. The chain rattled violently. Whoever it was, they were locked out. But they knew I was inside. Or they suspected. My attention snapped towards the front. Was it the police, finally investigating my 911 call from the other story's timeline, a thought I quickly dismissed as impossible? Or something else? The dragging sound outside the door intensified, followed by heavy pounding. Arthur, Arthur Penhaligon, open this door. The voice was muffled but deep, male, and filled with an unnatural resonance that sent chills down my spine. It wasn't human. Not entirely. The creature, Jade, stopped whimpering. Her head lifted slowly, the blind eyes turning towards the sound at the front door. A low growl, different from before, deeper, more territorial, rumbled in her chest. The pounding at the front door grew more frantic. I know you're in there. The time is wrong. The balance shifts. Let me in. Jade struggled to her feet, ignoring her injured leg, ignoring the burnt arm. She faced the front of the shop, her ruined mouth stretching into a terrifying snarl, no longer directed at me, but at the intruder. I was trapped. Trapped between a wounded, ancient echo seemingly bound to defend this space, and whatever monstrous entity was trying to break its way in. The silver knife suddenly felt very small, very inadequate. The pounding on the front door became a furious battery, shaking the entire frame. Heavy, splintering cracks echoed through the shop as the wood began to give way. The deep, resonant voice outside roared again, laced with inhuman rage. The mechanism requires order. You disrupt the cycle. Open. Jade, ignoring me completely now, moved with a horrifying, limping gait towards the front of the shop. Her burnt arm hung uselessly, dripping dark ichor, but her good arm was raised, claws extended, her blind face contorted in a territorial snarl directed at the door. The low, guttural growl intensified, vibrating the very air around her. She wasn't just an echo of sorrow, she was a guardian, however twisted, of this place. I backed further into the shadows near the kitchenette, silver knife held tight, my mind racing. What cycle? What order? Was the entity outside connected to the clock's function? Had my winding it, and Jade's subsequent emergence, angered it? With a final, ear-splitting crack, the front door burst inward, ripped halfway off its hinges, revealing the figure standing on the threshold. It was tall, impossibly tall and thin, draped in heavy, dark robes that seemed to absorb the dim light. Its limbs were too long, bending at unnatural angles. But the head, it wasn't a head. It was a swirling vortex of shadow, constantly shifting, coalescing and dissolving, with two burning points of intense, malevolent red light deep within, like embers in a dying fire. No face, just darkness and those burning eyes. It radiated an aura of cold, calculating intelligence and immense power. Trespassers, the swirling shadow had hissed, the voice seeming to come from multiple points at once, layered and discordant. The balance must be restored. The echo contained. Its gaze swept the room, ignoring the shattered door, ignoring the mess, fixing first on Jade, then snapping towards me where I huddled in the back. Even without features, I felt the weight of its attention, cold and analytical. Jade shrieked, a sound mixing rage and perhaps fear, and launched herself towards the figure. Despite her dragging leg, she moved with surprising speed, her one good arm slashing wildly. The robed entity barely reacted. One of its impossibly long arms, emerging from the dark robe like a skeletal branch wrapped in shadow, simply batted her aside. Jade slammed against a display case filled with porcelain dolls, sending them crashing down around her. She landed in a heap, motionless for a moment, then began to stir weakly, moaning. The creature didn't spare her another glance. It turned its swirling shadow head back towards me, taking a slow, deliberate step into the shop. The floorboards groaned beneath its unseen feet. The interloper, it hissed, those red embers burning brighter. You touched the mechanism. You woke the flawed echo. You will rectify this. My mind blanked with terror. Rectify? How? Appease Jade? Kill her? Give myself up? The silver knife felt utterly useless against this. This thing, it glided forward, impossibly smooth, covering the distance between us with terrifying speed. I scrambled backwards, bumping against the counter, cornered. The basement door was only feet away, but trapped Jade lay between me and it, starting to push herself up weakly. The flawed echo resists containment. The entity rasped, its attention briefly flickering back to Jade as she struggled to rise, growling weakly. It clings too tightly to its grief. A new vessel is required, one with fresher sorrow, stronger ties. Its burning red eyes fixed back on me. Yours. It wasn't going to kill me. Not yet. It wanted to use me. A new vessel? Like Jade? Was that what happened to her? Taken over, replaced, twisted into this guardian echo? The thought was horrifying. The entity raised one of its long, shadow-wrapped arms towards me. I could feel a tangible cold emanating from it, a numbing force that seemed to leech the strength from my limbs. I tried to raise the silver knife, but my arm felt heavy, unresponsive. Suddenly, Jade shrieked again, not in pain, but in pure fury. Pushing herself up, she lunged not at me, but at the back of the robed figure, sinking her claws and teeth into the heavy fabric and whatever lay beneath. The entity staggered, letting out a surprised hiss, the cold pressure on me momentarily receding. It swatted backwards violently, trying to dislodge her, but Jade clung on with ferocious tenacity, tearing at the robes, her blackened teeth ripping through the shadowy fabric. For the first time, I saw what was beneath the robes. Not flesh, not bone, but shifting, intricate clockwork. Gears spun, springs coiled, tiny brass mechanisms whirred and clicked, all bathed in an unnatural, internal red glow that pulsed from the points where Jade's claws dug in. This creature wasn't just connected to the clock. It was clockwork, an impossible, sentient mechanism given terrifying form. It roared, a sound like grinding gears and shattering glass, and finally flung Jade off. She hit the far wall hard and crumpled. Lying still, the creature turned back to me, its robes torn, revealing more of the intricate, glowing mechanism beneath. Its shadowy head swirled faster, the red eyes burning with intensified rage. The cold pressure slammed back into me, heavier than before, pinning me against the counter. Insolent fragments, it hissed. Both will be reset. Its hand, impossibly long fingers ending in sharp, metallic points like clock hands, reached for my face. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the end, the silver knife falling uselessly from my numb fingers. Then, another sound. From the alcove. Chime. Loud, clear, resonant. A single, perfect chime from the grandfather clock. The clockwork entity froze, its hand inches from my face. Its swirling head snapped towards the alcove. The red eyes pulsed erratically. Chime. Another chime. Exactly 1 minute after the first. The clock was striking. But it wasn't midnight. It wasn't even close to an hour mark. My phone read 4:18 a.m. Chime. The entity let out a discordant shriek, like metal tearing. It backed away from me, its movements jerky, malfunctioning. No, not yet. The alignment. It stammered, the voices discordant and panicked. Chime. Jade stirred on the floor, pushing herself up again, her blind eyes fixed on the chiming clock. A look of recognition, hope, flickered across her ruined features. Chime. The clockwork creature stumbled backwards, bumping into shelves, sending antics crashing. Its form flickered, the shadowy robes dissolving and reforming, the internal red glow sputtering. The cycle. Broken. Containment. Chime. With a final, ear-splitting screech that sounded like a spring uncoiling catastrophically, the entity seemed to implode. The shadowy form collapsed inwards, the red light extinguished, leaving only a pile of dark, tattered robes and a faint smell of ozone and burnt metal on the floor. Chime. The seventh chime faded, leaving a ringing silence. The shop was still. The entity was gone. Jade lay slumped against the wall, breathing raggedly, her blind eyes still fixed on the now silent clock. I pushed myself off the counter, legs trembling. My arm throbbed where the creature's cold had touched it. I looked towards the alcove. The clock stood silent. Its hands still pointed to 4 a.m. But something was different. Tucked into the minute hand, almost invisible, was a tiny, folded corner of dark paper. Another note. My ears were still ringing from the final, catastrophic chime and the entity's screeching demise. The silence that followed felt heavy, unnatural. Dust motes danced in the weak pre-dawn light filtering through the shattered front door. The pile of dark robes lay crumpled and empty on the floor, already seeming to dissolve at the edges like ash. Shakily, I pushed myself to my feet. My arm, where the clockwork creature's cold energy had touched it, felt numb and deeply bruised. Across the room, Jade lay slumped against the wall, her breathing shallow and ragged. The milky eyes were closed now, her ruined face slack, looking almost peaceful if not for the blackened, sizzling burn on her arm where the silver knife had connected. Was she dying? Or just dormant again? My attention was drawn back to the clock. Silent, still, hands fixed at 4 a.m. And the tiny, folded corner of dark paper tucked into the minute hand. Another message. Another command? Verily, I approached the alcove. The air here no longer felt bitingly cold, but carried a strange emptiness, a void where the entity's oppressive presence had been. I reached up and carefully plucked the folded paper from the clock hand. It felt identical to the last note, ancient, brittle, yet strong. The same complex, writhing sigil was pressed into the red wax seal. Breaking the seal, I unfolded the paper. The same elegant, iridescent script greeted me. The intruder is silenced. The flawed echo remains. Its vessel decays. Its binding beacons with a fractured cycle. Release requires resonance. The heart remembers. Find the anchor. Sever the tie before the next alignment. My head swam. Intruder silenced. That had to be the clockwork creature. Flawed echo, Jade. Vessel decays. Binding beacons. Was she dying because the cycle, whatever that was, had been disrupted by the chiming? Release requires resonance. The heart remembers. What heart? Jade's? The locket? Find the anchor. Sever the tie. Anchor. Meredith had used that word. The souls bound to the inn were anchors. Jade was clearly an anchor, perhaps the first anchor given her connection to 1887. But what was the anchor? The primary one? And sever the tie. How? With the silver knife? It seemed too brutal, too direct, especially after witnessing Jade's agony. Before the next alignment. What alignment? Where? The clock chiming again? Sunri se? The next midnight? The note offered urgency, but no clarity. A low moan came from across the room. Jade stirred. Her blind eyes fluttered open, rolling slightly before fixing vaguely in my direction. The raw hunger wasn't there, nor the territorial fury. Just pain and exhaustion. Elias, she rasped, the sound like stones grinding together. Water, water. Rule 10, now about monitoring water, turning off taps. Water as a conduit. Water from room 13 had extinguished the binding candles. Could water help her? Hesitantly, I moved towards the kitchenette, retrieving a dusty glass and filling it from the tap. The pipes groaned in protest. I returned to Jade, kneeling cautiously a few feet away. I have water, I said softly. She strained, trying to push herself up further against the wall, her gaze fixed on the glass. She couldn't reach it. Taking another risk, I moved closer, holding the glass out. Her clawed hand reached, trembling violently, not with aggression, but with weakness. She couldn't grip the glass. Carefully, I brought the rim of the glass to her cracked, blackened lips. She drank greedily, spilling some down her chin onto the tattered dress. The water seemed to soothe the rasping in her throat slightly. Key. She breathed after a moment, her voice clearer, though still rough. Locket. The heart. She knew about the locket. The heart remembers. Was the locket the heart? And the key? The basement key? I pulled both items from my pocket. The silver locket gleamed faintly. The brass key felt cold. Jade's head turned sharply towards them, the milky eyes widening slightly, as if she could somehow sense their presence. Yes, open, she urged, gesturing weakly towards the locket with her good hand. My fingers fumbled with the clasp again. It clicked open, revealing the miniature portraits of young Elias and the severe, beautiful woman Jade once was. I held it out so she could. Well, not see, but perhaps sense it. Her reaction was immediate and heart-wrenching. A choked sob escaped her lips. Her hand reached out, claw-like fingers tracing the air where the portrait must be. Gone, so long gone, she whispered, tears, or some dark ichor resembling them, leaking from the corners of the blind eyes. Trapped, the cold. The locket is the anchor? I asked urgently. How do I sever the tie? She shook her head weakly, a spasm of pain crossing her features. Not anchor, memory, resonance. She struggled for breath. Key, unlocks. Below, always below. Below, the basement. The key unlocked the offering according to the first note. But Jade seemed to be saying it unlocked something else down there. Something connected to the locket, to memory, to resonance. A floorboard creaked near the front of the shop. I froze, spinning around, silver knife instantly back in my hand, though I hadn't consciously retrieved it. Nothing, just the settling of the old building in the pre-dawn quiet. But the sound jolted me. Sunrise was coming. The note had mentioned alignment. I couldn't waste time. What's below, Jade? I pressed gently but firmly. What does the key unlock down there? She moaned, curling in on herself again, the effort of speaking seemingly too much. The sizzling burn on her arm looked worse, cracked and festering. She was fading. Box. His secrets. Resonance. Sever. Her voice trailed off into incoherent rasping. A box? Elias' secrets? Below? It had to be in the basement. The key didn't just open the door. Maybe it opened this box too? And somehow, this box, these secrets, held the key to severing her tie. It was another gamble. Going back down into that basement, knowing she was weak, but potentially still dangerous. Knowing the silver hurt her. Knowing Sunrise approached. But her words, release, promised release, echoed in my mind. Elias had promised her. Maybe this was how I fulfilled that promise. Maybe this was the responsibility. Okay, Jade, I said, standing up. I'll go. I'll find the box. Just stay here. It was a ridiculous thing to say to a creature trapped between life and death, but I felt I had to say something. She didn't respond, just lay there, her breathing shallow. Knife in one hand, flashlight and key in the other. I approached the jagged hole in the floor. The basement air wafted up, cold, damp, metallic, decaying. Taking a bracing breath, I swung my legs over the edge and carefully lowered myself down, finding precarious footholds on the broken timbers until I dropped the last few feet onto the packed earth floor below. The silence down here was different. Not empty, but watchful. Waiting, my flashlight beam cut through the oppressive darkness, landing on the spot where I'd found the locket. The disturbed earth, and beyond it, deeper in the shadows. The source of the earlier cough and scraping? Steeling myself, I swept the light around the perimeter, searching for a box. Elias' secrets. What would he hide down here?